Thank you for that.
Oh, there's my pen.
No. Okay.
Everything.
All right. Okay, so then just moving then swiftly, just to remind members of the usual housekeeping about keeping the phones and other electronic devices, the tablets and so on silence. Any members have anything to record in terms of any interest in relation to the agenda today? To be declared. And we move on to apologies. Any apologies to record?
Gregory Campbell and Sammy Wilson.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Paul. Moving on then to the draft minutes. So members' content, page 6 of your pack for the minutes for accuracy. Agreed on that. Chairperson business. Just to advise members that the payment cafes bill is scheduled for consideration stage on the 4th of March and further consideration stage on the 25th of March. And so, just to say that, I mean, obviously the may be represented through the chairperson and any other members, of course, as is normal during those debates. I'm also been advised that I've been asked to speak at an Ipsos Social Security Agency conference 27th of March. Now, I'll have a look at that and then come back to members who haven't actually had a chance to consider that. But I presume that's just of the committee?
It is, yes.
Okay, so I mean, obviously I'll come back to the committee on that. Just again, then another item, business in the community have approached the committee asking that it sponsors a graduation event for their Aiming Higher programme. It's meant for 16 to 20-year-olds with a view to improving their employability and skills and readiness to enter the workplace. Their ideas for an event to be held in the Lawn Gallery in the week commencing 31st of March. Members content that we would sponsor that event. We've done it before.
I wouldn't be there.
Okay, so we send the sponsor for that. Okay, thanks very much, and we'll come back to members with further information on that particular event. On matters arising, just to remind ourselves that some members had noted concerns regarding the progress of legislation relating to alcohol and gambling reform. If members are content, then it would be beneficial then to schedule a briefing from departmental officials on both of those matters. Okay, thank you for that. And again, just to advise members that the committee staff, Kevin and so on, met with the permanent secretary of the department and other officials last Friday, and they indicated that the memorandum and papers requested in respect of phase 2 of the inquiry would be provided to the committee by the 20th of February as requested. I want to put on record here, I mean, we are still waiting from the department to provide, or for the department to provide us with information in respect of phase 1 of the inquiry. And I formally, as a chair of this committee, I want to record my deep frustration. I consider this to be an obstruction of this committee's ability to do its work. Absolutely. There's information around meetings that they were to provide us, and they haven't yet done that. And they're been telling Cam, while we're doing this parallel with providing this other information for phase 2, we have been unable to conduct this inquiry in a more expeditious time frame on the basis of not receiving documentation in time from that department. And we have Will Hare here to deal with that. And I am actually basically, as far as I'm concerned, I am actually saying that that department and the permanent secretary who came here and assured us that that matter would be resolved, we are now being obstructed by the department in an ability or refusal to provide us with the appropriate documentation in time. And I just think it's totally and utterly unacceptable. And I want to formally advise them of that. And if needs be, we'll write to the Speaker of the Assembly, because this is obviously just to inform them, to give added weight to the fact that this committee is conducting a statutory-based inquiry and is being, in my view, we are being obstructed in that inquiry by senior officials in the department. And I just think that that's unacceptable. And then in any other world, somebody's head would roll for that. So I'm putting that on the record for the committee. And the members content to accept and agree with that position.
Absolutely. Should the committee even consider, although you've said it publicly, should we even consider a public statement to draw attention to the fact?
Well, I actually think it's well timed that we do that, to be quite truthful.
Chair, is there any merit or any advantage in raising this then with the head of the civil service as well?
Can do, yep. And I mean, obviously, I think when we convene an inquiry, format at some point we'll deal with this, because that the map, and it'll be one of the matters we will reflect on, because clearly this has been the first such inquiry conducted within the Assembly, and I think it's important that we will in the round reflect on our experience, because I've said before, I mean, I can understand with the first time we've had such an inquiry that, and I think we've given quite a bit of latitude to people, although it's not actually rocket science for senior officials to be able to respond to the request for information. It's not something entirely new. I mean, it's a statutory-based process, and I would expect officials in their professional capacity to be able to deal with these matters relatively easy. And that's why, as at this point in time, because we've had senior officials here, and particularly we've had the Permanent Secretary and address this matter with them, I consider this to be an obstruction. And I think members appear to agree with that, so thank you for that. And we will issue a press release to that effect, and contact the head of civil service, and I think notify the speaker as well for their information. Okay, and then we will return to it as a committee when we're in the inquiry session. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, just at the meeting on the 9th of January, we considered correspondence from OFM committee requesting comments on the European Commission work programme, and specifically a paper created by RAISE, which includes European initiatives relevant to DSD, and that would be, for example, the Labour Mobility Package and European Accessibility Act. The FM requested comments by 14th of February. Now, obviously, we haven't actually made a submission per se on that, so we need to consider if we do want to make a submission, particularly as comments from all the statutory committees will be included in the OFM committee's report. So could we schedule this as a substantive item for next week's meeting, just to ensure that we are on the record? So our members happy enough, then we'll do that, and then the relevant documents will be provided in your next week's briefing pack, okay, for advance consideration. Okay, thanks members for that. Final item there just on that. Number of other similar requests have been received recently from committees seeking the committee's comments on papers and inquiries, and these include delivering social change, DCAL committee's inquiry into inclusion in the arts of working class communities, and DEL's inquiry into post-school provision for individuals with learning disabilities. And obviously committee comments have been requested for these inquiries for various dates in March. So if members wish to provide comment on these papers, then they can do so at next week's meeting. So could I ask people to consider those reports and maybe prepare for providing us with some advice or some memoranda next week for our consideration?
Great.
Okay, and if anybody can do it in advance, then official will circulate them to all the members. Okay, thanks very much. Moving on then to the next item. It's the housing conference, and we have a briefing by RAISE, and that's on page 12 of your pack, and this is in regard to the 2014 housing conference. We'll have Eleanor Murphy, Eleanor, the research officer. Eleanor, you're very welcome here this morning to the committee, and I know that you attended the conference and you have some briefing you want to provide to members, so just leave it over to yourself to do that.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay.
I'm just going to provide you with an overview of some of the issues arising from recent housing events and conferences, and I'll finish off by suggesting perhaps a number of areas the committee may wish to look at. I'm sure there'll be an opening, and it's very busy forward work programme. There have been several housing-themed events over the past year or so. It kicked off with the Committee for Social Development's own stakeholder event in April last year, which the committee was going to use to shape its work programme in relation to both the new housing strategy and the social housing reform programme. The event was very well attended. In fact, all the events were very well attended and they were very informative, which obviously reflects the very high level interest in housing at the moment. A number of recurrent themes emerged throughout all the events, such as stress in the construction industry, social housing new builds and the social housing waiting list, the financing of social housing, fuel poverty, homelessness, housing affordability, regulation standards in the private rented sector, welfare reform, and issues around the social housing reform programme, such as stock transfer. Most of the issues around the reform programme were touched upon in DSD's own stakeholder event in November last year. And I won't go into this in any detail because I understand the department are going to provide you with a briefing on this. They've also been carrying out a number of stakeholder engagement events around the country, so I'm sure they'll let you know about those. One recurrent theme arising from all the events is a concern over tenant participation and engagement. How tenants will be consulted upon with regards to the reform programme, but also about the potential enhanced role for tenants in future governance and inspection arrangements. This was in fact the theme of the Housing Rights Service event in December 2013, which provided speakers on issues such as the benefits landlords can derive from tenant participation, the role of tenants in stock transfers, and involving tenants in housing regulation. Finally, the briefing paper you have in front of you covers the Northern Ireland Housing Conference held in January, and I won't rehash the presentations because the summaries are there, but they covered areas such as the challenges in new build supply, Glasgow Housing Association's approach to meeting housing need, housing finance, in particular the retention of stock within the public sector, and the Housing Selection Scheme review, which you've already had a presentation on. One very important aspect of all the events is that there were speakers from other jurisdictions who provided fresh and innovative perspectives and approaches to a range of housing issues. What was perhaps most striking is that many social housing providers in Great Britain have been given the freedom to move beyond just simply building and maintaining homes, and they first divide into areas such as tenant employment and training programmes, student bursaries, helping communities set up businesses, providing youth facilities and apprenticeships, community policing, tenant governance and management of private rental sector properties. I realise the committee's got a really busy work programme with inquiry, taking up a significant amount of time, but if any capacity should arise, you may want to take a proactive approach by looking into some areas around the social housing reform programme, such as restructuring, and housing finance, housing regulation inspection, stock transfer, and retention of stock transfer, and issues around rent setting. One approach you might want to consider is maybe a study visit. And to maximise the benefit of the visit, you might want to look at other issues, such as what other providers are doing to mitigate against welfare reform, dealing with antisocial behaviour, housing allocation policies, and the ability of housing providers to develop training and employment opportunities. I'm happy to assist the committee in any way I can in identifying areas to visit or any background research. Understand the department is going to brief you, so after that you may have a clearer view of where you want to go with this.
Well, thanks very much for that. Okay, members have the information in your pack. So, Fra, you wanted in?
Yeah, and again, Alan, thanks very much for the paper as always. It's a good paper, and certainly allows you to focus on that, and even the questions at the back of it, more options in them questions than we've got from the department over the past number of years, and I think that's a point that needs to be made. I think one of the interesting things in it is the presentation that was done by the guy from Queen's University. He seems to be pointing in a different direction. I know there was quite a lot of people at the conference, but what way was that greeted at the conference?
There was no sort of feedback on it, Fra. It was just really a presentation on it. There was no questions or anything. He did outline the three options that he thought were possible to retain the stock within the public sector. But his reports have been published, but there was really no feedback on our questions on that.
Okay, so was it just a series of presentations?
That's all it was. The parent centres had about 15 minutes each, so it wasn't anything in depth.
And to see in terms of the presentation by Glasgow Housing Association, that's been held up in fairly steaming housing circles across the thing. But even reading in the thing, there's some difficulties and problems in there with the way they're running, especially through that Wheatley Housing Group.
Yeah.
You know, it's not to be all and end all on the way people put it across. And so I'm actually a bit disappointed in the terms that the conference, and I know Mickey was invited to the conference, I think, but I thought the conference itself would have started to deal with some of the options that may have been available. And there was a mixture within the presentation, at least the Housing Association approach, the trade union approach, and I think, so, Chair, I'm a bit disappointed that that discussion wasn't furthered at it. But thanks again.
It was just a half-day event for us, so it was really to give just an overview, to stimulate some debate and some thought on it.
Thanks very much.
I mean, certainly from my point of view, I mean, there's been a number of conferences, seminars.
Yeah, but we're made up and more debated, I think.
Yeah, certainly more comedy. There have been a number of seminars and workshops and conferences, and when you look at some of them, there's nearly like a flurry of them, and you'd have to ask yourself what's the sum total of a number of them in terms of adding any new date or even for real debate. And I do think that the stakeholder event that we held was an important one, so we need to return to that. Dolores?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Eleanor. Eleanor, could I ask, in relation to the report, Keeping Our Housing Public, and any discussions around the finance remodelling, if you could shed any light on that or point us in the direction of better information in terms of some of those arguments. And Chair, I think I picked people up right on this when I met some tenants recently of housing associations and housing executive, and I have been informed by some resident associations that there are call-out charges which housing associations tenants have to pay that housing executive tenants don't have to pay. And how does that then stand up to scrutiny under equality and access to services, goods and services?
All separate entities.
But surely, Chair, if you're a tenant of the... Yeah.
Faculty social
Yeah.
housing.
Yeah. I just wonder if maybe, or if you're not in a position to answer, maybe we could establish some answer on that and seek Equality Commission advice on it.
Yeah, that's not something I would know in depth, but I can find out for you and maybe consult with the Equality Commission, see whether the issues come up with them.
I think, Chair, it's an important one, particularly if we're looking at the intended direction of the Minister in relation to public housing.
Well, I mean, the intention of all this is for the provision of social housing. So social housing tenants should be treated the same.
That's
I
right.
would expect. Whoever the provider is, because that's just a mechanism, really. Okay, no other members indicating to speak. Eleanor, thanks very much for the paper. And obviously, what's important is that we do need to look at this paper and your comments in relation to when we have the Housing Executive Department here, and I think it's the 27th of February. So we'll take that discussion and we'll, in a way, retain your documentation in your presentation here, and to help us to deal with that particular briefing. And then we'll return, Eleanor, to yourself again after that.
And get the answer to the question.
Yeah.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Eleanor. Thank you. Okay, so members have enough then to, obviously we have the meeting scheduled for the 27th of February, so we continue this discussion at that and beyond that meeting on the 27th. Okay, thank you. Then moving on then to the next item on the agenda, which is number 6, which is the subordinate legislation. Which we have. Okay, so it's a statutory sick pay, maintenance of records, revocations, regulations 2014, and that's on page 20 of your pack. This proposed statutory removes the statutory sick pay record keeping obligations of employers following the abolition of the statutory sick pay percentage threshold scheme for Britain and Northern Ireland, it says here. Mickey, you had queried that.
Yeah, it was just the fact that if employers didn't have records, then they may not be able to recover statutory sick pay back from government. So there seemed to be an inference that employers were actually using the system to almost encourage workers to take time off, which I would disagree with.
Okay, but I mean, the Department's response is on page 27 of your packet. Happy to note their response, and then, then on that basis, are members content that the rule be made?
Right.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. And moving on to the next item, which is the SL1 annual operating of pensions and benefits. And again, draw your attention to this particular SL1. It's on page 31 of your packet. The Department's proposing to make a series of statutory rules in order to make the appropriate changes to benefits for the incoming financial year. From April, the increase in most benefits will be based on the CPI, apart from those benefits which fall on the Welfare Benefits Operating Act 2013. Which will rise by 1%. Just to ask if the committee is content that rules be made.
Just want to put on record, Chair, the change from RPI to CPI was a cut anyhow. And it's mentioned there that the CPI, I think there was a growth of 2.7%. Yet the government in Britain have said that they will not, for 3 years, people's benefits will be limited to 1%. So that's an overall cut. You know, but there was already a cut with the change from retail price index to the consumer price index anyhow, and this is a further cut. It's just that maybe indicative of their policy in terms of benefits, because in real terms this is a fairly big cut. And you consider that by their own admission, people in benefit are on subsistence level. So just to make that point.
I mean, I think what we've done and previously, and I think it's particularly important in this one as well, because this changes it from 1 year to 3 years, some of this uprating. So, I mean, what we have done in the past, just for newer members, a number of members, myself included, and others, were very concerned. I think at one point every member of the committee and all parties were concerned about these levels of uprates, because really, in effect, they're arbitrary decisions taken by the government of Westminster, but nevertheless, it's probably too big, if you like, a challenge for the executive to undertake. If, say, for example, you broke party in this issue, would you be able to afford that or not? I think members in the past, when they've dealt with matters like this, where they felt that they had no real option other than to approve it, did put on record their concerns about it and their reluctance to do it. So, I mean, and I know certainly a number of members would want to do that. So we're our members content that the SL1 would be approved, but with the committee expressing reluctance.
Yeah.
And to do that, because it is an arbitrary uplift.
I think, Chair, that's for comment.
So it's placed on the record, just for members. It doesn't have to, you know, it can be just put on the record that members or a number of members. You know, we can do that, just so that it reflects accurately. I mean, not necessarily everybody agrees. Okay. Thanks very much for that, members. So moving on then to the next. So members are content then that the rule be made, notwithstanding the concerns of a number of members of the committee. Okay. Correspondence then, item number 8 on the agenda. Again, you'll have your papers there it's on page 41 of your pack. From McCon.
It's just on the correspondence. Are you going to run through them, or are you going to take?
I'm not going to run through many of them, Fra. I mean, Kevin diligently gave me pages of notes to remind you of, but I mean, I'm taking members and read the correspondence.
Chair, I was just going to raise the letter from the Housing Rights Service.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that they have put a...
Where's it in track? Can you draw it?
Correspondence.
He trusts you to read it as well.
I might read you out for that.
They don't want me to go through the number.
I'll give you certain latitudes since you don't have much experience of this.
Page 40. They run a private tenants forum. They've requested that we meet with the forum, and I think it's very timely, given that we've been discussing issues in relation to the private tenancies, rights of registration or the protection of deposits. Now, they have made a couple of suggestions. One is that we visit maybe do our meeting in the Housing Rights Service offices, or that we do an informal session up here.
Could we, well, thanks very much for that, Fra. Could we actually put that in, those that we have? I mean, we're doing a meeting with the department here on housing on the 27th of this month. The committee has already agreed that we're going to return to housing on a more strategic basis in terms of forward work programme. Are you happy enough that we include that in? The logistics, for example, of doing a meeting in the Housing Rights Service office, I'm not sure where it's followed or not, I don't know, because there's certain requirements that have to be met. So can we take that in, if that's doable? Yes, and we'll certainly have the engagement with the Housing Rights Service on the issue.
So just a comment on it, the Dell Committee done a meeting in the Science Park. Is in a very confined space, and there didn't seem to be any difficulties with it.
Okay. Okay, so I mean, members basically generally agreement with you, Mickey Bailey.
Yeah, could I just welcome the provision of free Wi-Fi in your city centre, which is a combination of the DSD and Uri and Mourne District Council.
Does that include free learners packages for your?
Very welcome to that.
Hopefully.
All right, okay, I just want to move swiftly on here. I will sort of, because Kevin's been very good in preparing the earlier report, I'll accede to his request to note some of these items of correspondence. So we have on, where am I? Page 3, that's the table items folder. Yeah, it's forwarded forward from the Committee for Finance Personnel concerning the budget bill 2014 and the accompanying spring supplementary estimates. The committee has forwarded the paper potential model for other departments to follow in future in terms of briefing committees at the department level. So we've just suggested the committee forward this paper to the department and asked it to consider following the model in future briefings to the committee. Again, then to note that the C03 has invited members to attend a mentoring training event at Lloyd's Banking Group on the 12th of March. There's a sample programme for the event and it's provided at page 54. Just if members are interested in attending that, if we could let Kevin know, we can facilitate that. On page 14 of tabled items, the committee again for finance and personnel written to all statutory committees regarding the Northern Ireland Audit Office report on sickness absence in the public sector. This has been referred to it for consideration. So we suggest then that the committee follow the advice suggested in the memo, and that is to ask the department to provide a copy of its response to the report's findings in the first instance, with the briefing from the audit office potentially to follow. Members happy enough to we adopt that approach? Okay, thank you very much. And then could I just ask members then to, if you're content to note the correspondence outlined in your memo? Agree then on that. Again then the next item for work programme, page 16 of your tabled items. Members content to note that for work programme. Again, these are always moving pieces. Okay, next item is AOB. Any matters, any member wanting to raise any matter under AOB?
Chair, I just wonder if we could get an update at some stage on the neighbourhood renewal budget and work programme for the new financial year.
I think we did we agree
get
that
that?
very recently? We asked,
I think there was, I did think,
I thought we asked the
Yeah.
department or in relation
yeah,
to preparations for
the
transition.
RPA.
But we'll follow it up.
I don't think it was just afraid I haven't missed it, but I don't
Okay, we'll
recall.
follow that up. Okay, members. So then just the next meeting of the committee then will take place on Thursday, 20th of February 2014, 10 a.m. In room 29. And on that basis, nothing else to say. Then the meeting stands adjourned. Thank you very much.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room